Okay, I thought I would hear a voice, but maybe you just hear the voice.
I
Nope.
heard a little ding. Is that what I was supposed to hear?
Hey, yeah, no, it's going. Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Okay, good. I was like, oh, it didn't do anything. Okay, well, I'm glad you could make it today. Thank you.
Thank you
And
for having me.
awesome. So the only first question I have is that if you could give just like a quick a little over simplified introduction of yourself, and then we will go a little deeper into it if that works for you.
Yes, I can do that. So I just talked about this last night and I couldn't remember the dates then either. A long time ago, I met friends of mine who had a 6-year-old son. He was their oldest. And he was the most terribly behaved child I had ever met. Like, annoyed his siblings, punched holes in the walls, screamed and yelled and peed everywhere. And like, you could not be friends with this kid. His parents were exhausted. And I just thought he was this really terribly behaved kid. But he was their oldest, and then they had 3 birth kids after him. He was adopted through foster care. And their other 3 kids were like the 3 sweetest, most adorable, friendly, nice kids. So I always thought, well, it couldn't be a parenting thing. Like, it had to be something else, because they didn't just parent one child terribly and then parent the rest really well. So I spent a lot of time with them. Throughout the years, he was diagnosed with autism and ADHD and dyslexia and all of the other things. So as one of their close friends and as a elementary school teacher, I did a lot of tutoring with him. And you could not teach this kid. Like, you just could not. So I did all the dyslexia programs and ADHD stuff and all of these things with him. And nothing ever made a difference. And then when he was 12, which would have been, I think, about 2010, his family found out about reactive attachment disorder. They got in contact with Nancy Thomas and some of her programs, and they took him to a family bonding camp in Florida. And it's a week-long camp. So it wasn't like they had spent, months or years learning new parenting. It was a week. And they came home, and the difference in their family was incredible. Their child did not change. He was 12 at that point, and still till today has not made great choices. But the parents knew how to parent him. They knew how to handle behaviors effectively. They knew how to not let the chaos take over their home. They were so much less stressed. You could go to their house and it was fun. You could enjoy being with the family, and it wasn't that trauma or chaos completely taking over the house anymore. So I was very fascinated to what had gone on during that week. So 2 years later, the family invited me to go with them to volunteer at camp. The parents and one of the daughters were going. And their way of asking me if I would go volunteer was to tell me they'd booked a flight for me to go to Florida with them in March. And I lived in Ontario. I was like, sure, I will go with you. So I got to go to my very first camp. I missed all of the training because our flight was delayed and canceled. So you've been to camp. Imagine not having the training before you got there. And the week was just incredible. It was being able to watch these kids with all of the behaviors and see these really exhausted parents come into camp. And within a week, we didn't fix all the problems. We didn't heal kids while they were there. But we could see kids be able to start changing their behaviors, to see they had the capacity to make better choices. And then watching how empowered the parents got. They left camp feeling like they could be good parents to their kids. So that was 2012. And I have not stopped going to camps since then. So that's how I got started. And then for 2 years, I went to camps. I read every book on trauma and attachment I could get my hands on, did all the webinars, online courses. And then 2014, I started doing respite care full time. And I still do that today. So That's the brief introduction to how I got into all of this.
That's awesome. I never heard that, you know, because we didn't
Oh,
really get a
yes.
chance to actually talk about it when I was at camp and met you.
Yeah.
So I met Karen in March when I went and volunteered at the camp in Florida, which
Mhm.
was fantastic. So if I understood correctly, you started out as a teacher?
I did. Yes. I taught in our church's private school for 4 years. And I loved it. I loved teaching, but it was always my less well-behaved students that were my favorite.
Oh, it's a sign.
Yeah. I always felt like they were the ones I really got to know. I could help them problem solve. I could help them learn better solutions. And I really enjoyed that part. So I think that's what made the RAD so interesting to me, was being able to apply some of those same principles to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, when you were younger, were you like, I always want to be a teacher and work with children, or did that come up a little
No,
later?
no. I
Okay.
was absolutely, most definitely going to be a dentist
Oh,
when I was younger. So nothing to do with teaching or mental health or any of that. So yeah.
oh, that's awesome. So I find it interesting that you expressed that that this child, this young boy, was first diagnosed with a whole bunch of other things. So is
Mhm.
that common?
Very common.
Okay. And you know
Yes.
why?
RAD is considered very rare. So it is
Oh,
one of the last diagnoses that will be given to a child. And because the behaviors are so similar across a lot of those diagnoses, um, if someone is more familiar with ADHD, they're going to see it as ADHD. And if they're more familiar with autism, they're going to see it as autism behaviors. A lot of the behaviors are the same. We use the same brain-based interventions for them. The difference is the trauma that the child experienced and their lack of care and attachment to their caregivers. So yes, misdiagnoses are very common. And then you get like the OCD and the ODD and conduct disorder and all of those thrown in there as well, of course.
and they're more likely to are they more likely to diagnose ODD or OCD versus
Mhm.
RAD, reactive attachment disorder?
Yes, very
Interesting.
much so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say 90% of the kids I work with don't have an official diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder because it is so hard to get.
Now, the type of respite and like what you learned at the camp, do you find that, I mean, people that go, will they only go if their kids have reactive attachment disorder, or does it have to actually be considered red for it to be helpful or not?
No, so our new Camp Attach programs that we've started this year, we still focus on RAD as kind of the classical thing, but we've changed most of our information and programming to helping kids with attachment issues of any kind,
Okay.
any types
Awesome.
of break in attachment. And we do also get kids who have coexisting autism and ADHD and all of the other things. And the same therapeutic parenting, same brain-based interventions work for all of that. So we get a whole mix of things at camp these days.
Well, that's really good to know, just because I feel like part of what brought me into this is similar. I wasn't a teacher or anything. I just started a babysitting job, and it ended up being a child in the foster care system. And
Yeah.
we didn't had any clue what to do for her. And
Yeah.
it was just going to fall apart. And then I went to camp, and I mean, we didn't even do the full program, just little aspects of it were helpful for her.
Mhm.
I think one of the other children in that home probably could have benefited from the whole program, but
Right.
at the same time, I still have so much to learn. So if you were going to express what generally maybe the type of kids that come to camp or get help with you in like a more maybe symptoms, I guess, way, like like obviously I heard in this little boy some pretty aggressive symptoms. Is there any
Mhm.
passive symptoms that show up
Oh
in
yeah.
attachment issues?
Oh
Okay, what
yeah.
would that look like?
So the passive kids are the ones parents often, when I ask parents, what is your child like? They don't know how to answer it. And they're like, it's everything I do, they don't like. And they're not outwardly aggressive. They're not violent, they don't stand there and argue, they just refuse to do anything. Or they do the exact opposite of what the parent asks, or they just take like the longest amount of time to do something. And it's just these tiny little, very passive aggressive acts. So I've started working with a lot of conservative Mennonite families, and I know the camp you were at had a lot of that. And that's much more common in kids who grow up in conservative type homes, because they're not necessarily exposed to as much violence in their communities. So yeah, I've never dealt with quite so many passive aggressive kids as I have this last year.
Oh, that's interesting. Do they ever seem like it is it, well, I guess not, because if they're not doing anything, that's not really helpful. But I feel like it would, if I had two kids like that and I had one who was more passive and one that was really expressive, I feel like I would end up focusing all my attention on the aggressive one.
Yes.
Like unintentionally.
Yeah. Because the loudest kid gets the most attention, and the one who's breaking stuff gets more attention than the kid who just sits and does nothing. So yeah, the passive ones are the ones who definitely fall through the cracks more often.
That makes sense. And then, so I heard you mention therapeutic parenting. How would you describe what that is?
Therapeutic parenting is like this very intense parenting that focuses on building a relationship with a child and helping to heal the trauma they've experienced. So a therapist I work with calls it parenting on steroids. It's a very intentional type of parenting. So we use what we call intentional nurturing, and it's kind of like infant nurturing, but with older kids. No matter how old they are, a lot of them have missed out on that early nurturing from a primary caregiver. So we have parents redo that very intentionally with their kids. Another main focus of therapeutic parenting is safety. So physical safety for kids who have issues with that. And then also what Karen Purvis calls felt safety. And it's providing their kids with the feeling of being safe. Because they lack attachment and they've had terrible experiences, they don't feel safe in their own bodies. They don't feel safe in their own homes. They don't feel safe with the parents that they have. So a big part of therapeutic parenting is providing that safety and then using that intentional nurturing to help to build the relationship. That's in a nutshell.
That's in a nutshell. Okay. Now, this is something that I experience. If I've ever had to try to share what happens at camp, it doesn't register.
It's hard. Yeah.
Like, or even some of the things that I would do with some of the children I've worked with, especially the one where it was worked, like they were actually seeing fruit come out of it. And I was a lot calmer, which is, I like how you explained that about even if the child itself didn't necessarily change, like it benefited the family so much.
Exactly. Yes.
So if you could so there's the attachment theory part of it. Can you emphasize a little bit about the respect part of it and why that's important?
Yes. So another key part of therapeutic parenting is having parents become empowered to be strong, loving leaders. So because their child has experienced trauma, they don't develop trust in adults. So their mindset is, I have to be in charge. I have to be in control. I have to take over the world. And they don't see adults as being able to keep them safe. So we use respect, very high levels of it, to put the parents into that strong, loving leadership role so kids can see them as someone safe and who is able to be in control. So we use a lot of different types of respect. We call it the 110%. You got to go like way over the top with our kids. The more over the top their behaviors are, the more over the top your respect has to be. So we use things like having kids say yes, mom, and yes, dad every time their parent tells them something, which to people not familiar with therapeutic parenting sounds a little crazy, right?
Yes, yes.
But it has so many benefits to it. So when kids verbalize yes, their brain is primed for compliance. They're using positives, which our kids have a hard time doing. When they use their parents' title of respect, saying mom or dad, they're connecting with that person. They're putting that person into that leadership role. Answering with yes, mom or yes, dad also helps to build that back and forth relationship that our kids are missing. So when a parent says something and a child answers back, they're doing a serve and return, which means one person says something, the next person responds. Whereas if a parent just says something and there's no response from the child, it's that one-sided relationship again. So we have our kids have that level of respect. We have them ask for all of their needs to be met. Any need they have to go to the bathroom, get a Kleenex, have a drink, whatever it is. Again, sounds crazy to most people, but our kids, because of the experiences they had when they were little, they really don't think anyone's going to take care of their needs. They have to do it themselves. So when we put them in a position where they have to ask their parent, it gives the parent an opportunity to meet that need. So they ask very respectfully for that need to be met. And every time their parent is able to say, yes, I will meet your need. Yes, you can have what you need. That trust starts to develop. So we use these high levels of respect that sound a little crazy to a lot of people. But there's so many benefits. Another one we use is having kids walk beside or behind their parents at all times, rather than running in front. And kids who have experienced trauma have very concrete thinking, the most concrete thinkers. And when they can physically follow their parent, they see that parent as the concrete leader. This person is physically, concretely leading the way. And so they learn to develop trust in that caregiver. So we use a lot of respect. We call it the foundation of healing. So when they have that respect, they can build trust. They've respected this person. They see them as being able to be respected. Then they can build trust. And when they have that in place, they're able to start building attachment. So that back and forth relationship where they can give and feel love. So the respect is a big piece for all of that.
Yes, that makes sense. It's funny, I had kind of implemented that when I came back from camp the first time. I didn't quite have the authority because I was working as a care child provider, to have them call me Miss. So there was still like the peer, they just called me Sarah Jane, but it'd be yes, Sarah Jane. But it did make a difference. The only thing is I don't know if it was as effective as if they would have been also saying that yes, mom, yes, and yes, dad, because everybody was yes, Sarah Jane. Which was like, oh, okay. They're just responding out of habit. They're not actually where if it was all the way around, they have to pay a little more attention.
Exactly. Yes.
Voice they're hearing. But it was still effective. But I was kind of like, oh, it looked, because I think that some of the parents thought it was a little silly because they all of a sudden they're getting called yes, Sarah Jane all the time. So
very concrete thinkers, right?
Yes. Absolutely. So can you tell me a little bit about the RADdish Ranch?
Yes. So I founded the RADdish Ranch in, 2016, I believe. It started out as a nonprofit organization. We have since gotten rid of the nonprofit status and we're moving into more of a business format with it. So the original goal was to build a facility where we could host family bonding camps, where we could have parents come to do things like therapy intensives. We could hold trainings and do respite care and all of that great stuff. So we had plans going forward. I moved all the way to Manitoba because this is where it's going to be eventually. And then COVID happened and our lovely housing crisis. So plans are on hold for that. That was part of our decision to move into more of a business model than nonprofit model.
Okay.
But our main core focuses have remained the same. We're still focused on providing parents with resources to help them parent. So we do parenting courses online and in person. We have the family bonding camps. to provide respite care for families. And I used to do that, and I don't so much anymore. Now I just train other people to do it. So a lot of respite provider trainings, and working with families in that capacity. And then the last couple of years, I've started doing teacher workshops. So we're able to get these therapeutic techniques into classrooms, which has made a huge difference for families. So right now I do mostly online teaching. I do travel in between camps to different places. And then this year we partnered up with some other professionals to do our camp attach family bonding camps. So that's the RADdish Ranch in a nutshell. We have services available.
That's awesome. So the classroom one is interesting. And do you feel like the most people that the courses for that you've taught have just, I mean, it's pretty new. And obviously, generally we work with our connections, whatever those are.
Yes.
But have you had the opportunity to connect with any teachers that are is it mostly just private schools? Is it mostly Mennonite? Is it?
The last year has been mostly private schools, a couple of Mennonite schools. Before, when I was doing respite care and traveling around, I would work a lot more in public schools. And I never had like a set classroom program. And I'd be like, well, this is what parents do at home. This is the behavior intervention we use, but it doesn't really work well in classrooms. And I never had an answer for teachers. So I did a deep dive into a bunch of stuff the other year, and came up with a really effective way to use the same interventions in the classroom. So yeah, this year has been mostly private schools. But it's been amazing to see teachers, and I always recommend school board comes as well, which is always interesting. And it's been really amazing to see how that's played out in the classrooms, how teachers have been able to implement it. And the feedback I get the most is that they're amazed how well it works for their entire classroom. They come to the course thinking it's just for this one child. And they're like, my entire classroom benefited from this. My kids with ADHD can handle themselves, and I know how to deal with it. And my kid with disruptive behaviors, I know how to handle that. So that's been really amazing to hear that feedback, and then also to hear from parents who have kids in those schools. Because the biggest thing I'd hear from parents was that they almost felt like it was a little bit hopeless to ever get their kid to make progress, because they would make progress at home and they would go to school and lose all the progress. And so these parents have been able to say, I can now use therapeutic care in my home and send my child to school and know that they're going to get the same therapeutic care in school. So that part has been really amazing to watch as well.
Yeah, that would be amazing, especially as a parent. I can't even imagine. One thing, when I first went to camp, I think the training was really good. I had to reconcile when I wanted to really sit in the room where they actually did I don't know what you call it. I was gonna say intervention,
parent
but
training. Oh, the
parent
intervention.
training. Yeah. So, because I was trying to figure out how I was going to work with these kids, and because I wanted to direct their bonding with the parents, not so much me.
Right. Yeah.
But I had a really hard time reconciling when they were the long periods of waiting. I even felt my own overwhelmness in the beginning, and I thought it was cruel, and I thought it was terrible. But I mean, I definitely shifted in my thinking, because then I realized, even for me as a kid, I really just struggled with dyslexia, and they were always just trying to keep me up with everybody else. So I was constantly giving the answers. Yeah. But it's affected my confidence. And I'm not saying it's an attachment thing, but it has affected my own problem solving skills and capacity as an adult. Yeah. But I was curious if you could emphasize that waiting and having them come up with the answer or whatever.
Yes.
I want to say that.
Yes. So when kids at camp have some type of behavior, they come to what we call the intervention room, where we help intervene and teach them better ways to act. And some kids, or all kids, take a really long time. So the first thing we have them do is a brain shifter, when they've had a negative behavior, their brain goes into survival mode. And the only way to get them to be able to access logic and reasoning to problem solve about their behavior is by getting the brain shifted. So we have a bunch of different exercises that we use. Strong sitting, jumping on a mini tramp, jumping jacks, brain jumps. I think there's another one. Can't remember. I'm pretty sure there's 5.
Brain boosters? Or is it
Brain
called something else?
boosters. Yes,
Okay.
that's right. And so kids are given an instruction, I want you to do this brain shifter, and then that waiting part starts. And none of these brain shifters take long. The longest is like a minute for them to jump on a mini tramp, or 2 minutes. But trauma affects the brain. It affects logic and reasoning. It gets them stuck in survival mode. And so it takes kids way longer to do a brain shifter than any reasonable person thinks it should take. Up to hours. Like, you have kids in there all day sometimes. And sometimes their brain takes a long time to be able to get to a place where they're ready to do the brain shifter because they don't think they're good enough. So they think, I don't know if I can do that A+, which is the standard we have. So they think, I'm just not going to do it. And then I don't ever have to find out if I'm going to fail. They do that fail before they start behavior. Sometimes our kids don't feel safe. And it's that feeling of felt safety. This adult told me to do something. And in the past, when adults have told me to do something, something terrible happened. Adults did not take care of me the way they should have. So they think, if I do something the way this adult told me to, I'm not going to be safe. And so they don't do it because of that fear that something is going to happen. And it just takes them a long time. Sometimes they need to sit in there for 3 hours and then realize, hey, nothing is happening. Nothing bad is going on. Nobody's yelling at me. Nobody's getting mad. I feel safe enough. And then they're able to do that brain shifter. Sometimes kids just do it as a push away behavior. They think, I don't want to connect with my parents. I don't want to build that relationship. So to not do that, I'm just going to sit in here for a long time so that I don't have to build that relationship. And then we do occasionally get the kids who feel really hopeless. We had some, I think it was at the Florida camp you were at, actually.
Yes.
2 little boys, and we had some just at this last camp we did. Because of the experiences they had had, and they were really little, they were about 4 and 5. When they would come into that intervention room, they really thought that was it. They'd lost their family. They would never see their parents again. And so there was no point for them to try and do a brain shifter. And I mean, that first day they sat in there all day, these 2 little tiny guys, and we would move them around, get their bodies moving. They had their meals. They went to the bathroom, all of the stuff they needed. But they could not get their brains to a place where they felt safe enough to do that. So many reasons why kids take a long time. But when they do get to a point where they can do that brain shifter, they feel really proud of themselves. They've overcome something hard. They figured out something that they thought was impossible for them to do, and it helps to build their self-esteem. So every time they get to problem solve like that, it builds that self-esteem. And eventually they start to feel safer. They realize that the only person who's missing out in life is them when they're sitting in there or waiting to do a brain shifter. So the time does decrease as it goes on, but the waiting part, it's can take a while.
Yes. I have a random question. Am I purple?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
I
Oh,
don't
well,
know
that's
why.
fine. I'm not sure how that happened, but
Because like my little screen in the corner is still colors, but you're completely purple.
Oh, well. Okay, that's fine. I was just like, why am I purple? Yeah. So that's another thing I want to say about Karen for anyone who, because do you still offer the service like people can call you for on phone like coaching, personal coaching?
Yeah.
Because when one thing I really noticed about Karen, I went to 2 camps, and one of the camps Karen wasn't at, but I did notice how effective and attuned Karen is, partly from just her experience, but I think it's also from her naturally God-given gifts too, is that there's the basis of the type of therapeutic parenting that's instructed at camp, but every child is still a little bit different, like you just explained with those two boys.
Yeah.
And I even noticed with another girl, she would just take out so she had more privacy because it was just like embarrassing for her or something. Like, so Karen is really good at being attuned to maybe the tweaks that individual kids need, but still staying on the basis of the thing. So if you want to call her, I would highly recommend it. Then it's more personalized too. So
yeah, we always have. I mean, there is our basic intervention program we use. And then kind of the goal at camp is, so the first couple of days, as you know, the kids are with us to work on their behaviors. And it's spending those days figuring out what works for this child, what doesn't work for this child, what's going to be most effective. And then being able to pass that on to the parents and helping them really individualize the interventions really helps them to succeed better when they go home.
Okay. Yes. So then I know we talk about respect. I don't know where you stand on like the whole, if you know much about Jordan Peterson or talk about him, but that's okay. I listened to
one of recognize the name, but
oh, you recognize the name. Okay. He's just a psychologist who's kind of had a bigger platform and gotten some attention. He's fairly conservative, but his big emphasis is responsibility. And obviously I haven't seen everything he's done, and I haven't even read any of his books, but I've listened to quite a few of his podcast episodes, and it seemed to be like the way that he was talking about child rearing gave the balance, this is what I find at camp too. It's the balance of, even though he used the word responsibility, I would kind of connect that in with respect. But still attachment based, because we can't just give kids whatever they want, because then it's just like utter chaos.
Yes.
But so I have a big dream, which will maybe never happen, is that one day Jordan Peterson will interview you, and then there'll be more awareness for camp attachment. It'll be fantastic whenever that happens.
I'm gonna have to look him up now. I'm curious.
Okay. I mean, yeah, and I don't know enough about him, so what I've seen, I really, really appreciate it and enjoyed.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to make sure that I got. Yeah, you asked some of those questions you just answered before I even had to ask them, which was fantastic.
I do talk about this a lot, like I said, so.
Well, it was perfect. I guess the one thing is, for anyone out there who may have the bias that these type of behavior struggles or struggle for children only happens in adoptive or foster kids. Would you speak on that at all?
Absolutely. I've noticed over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, starting just before COVID, I started to notice it. We've had more birth families reach out for help for their kids because of attachment struggles they're having. And we were just talking about this at the last camp we did. We were wondering if it was more birth families are experiencing more trauma, or if it's becoming more acceptable for those families to reach out for help. And how many families have struggled in silence because their kids weren't adopted, so it couldn't be attachment disorder. So birth family kids can have attachment disorders as well. The same risk factors apply to them as it does to any other child. So kids who have been adopted or have been through foster care always have the risk factor of loss of a caregiver, a traumatic experience of losing their home, or things that are familiar to them. So those are the given ones when you have those situations. A lot of the birth families I've worked with, they have had traumatic medical experiences, or they've lived through natural disasters, or it's been moms who have been in abusive relationships. So anything that causes trauma and breaks the attachment between that child and caregiver can lead to reactive attachment disorder or attachment issues, which is a little kind of the milder form of RAD. So yeah.
So that it's just nice to know that it sounds like the stigma of it is going down.
Yep.
Okay. So the other thing is that you've written a couple books. I have 2 of them here.
Yes.
Which are like perfect little, like they're not big, right? They're great. I keep looking at them for when we do, especially this therapeutic parenting one, because this is a great example of what rad is. But this one I always have to look at because I don't remember what that is. And the other thing, just like about confidence, and you said this about encouraging the child because they have the sense of pride in themselves. I just had to reconcile with my own wounds. And one time when I was working with a girl who was doing a restitution, which maybe you want to say something about, but she had to pick some things under a tree and the tree was poking her and she was like, it's poking me. And I'm like, I know, what do you want to do about that? She cried for a long time, but eventually she put a bike helmet on and went and got a sweater and she asked if she could do those things. And you could say, look at what a great idea. You're such a good thinker. And build in her confidence. We had to go through the pain of like, oh, I just want to give you all the answers.
Exactly. Yes.
So what's the danger of giving the child the answers and not sitting in that painful waiting?
Yeah. Giving them the answers makes them feel they're not smart enough to think of it on their own. So our kids already have this much self-confidence. And when we take away any opportunities for them to build that, it gets lower. And they think, well, you had to tell me something obvious, like put a helmet on or get a jacket. I'm not smart enough to think of that on my own. And then we're also not giving up. So we're taking that away from them and then also just not giving them more opportunities to problem solve. They also sometimes, for caregivers, it can be really frustrating to give the answers all the time. So you constantly feel like you're the brain for two people or however many kids you have. It's exhausting. And so as much work as it is to not give the answers sometimes and let them figure it out, it pays off in the long run because eventually they're able to use their own brain and you don't have to think for everybody anymore.
Yes, that makes sense. That it's a lot.
Yeah, and just that pride they feel in finding their solution. And they're always so excited about it. I know one little kid I had, he was maybe 10, and I was at a friend's horse ranch, and this kid's restitution was picking up horse poop from one manure pile and moving it to the back manure pile. And it was like very clearly there was this little path for the wheelbarrow from one to the other through the field. It was maybe like 20 feet away. So I gave him the shovel. I said, the goal is to get this pile to that pile. And I said, you figure it out. This was a little city kid. He had never been in a field before, never mind pick up horse poop before. And so I had a book and I went and sat on a rock and I watched him and he filled the wheelbarrow like overflowing. And I knew this little tiny kid would never be able to move it at all. So he tries, of course, dumps it all over, fills it back up again, finally gets it like ridiculously full, but he could move it. And he takes this winding path through the weeds and around the field, not on the path at all, just completely random, complaining the entire way how hard this was, dumped it out halfway through, had to walk back, get his shovel, put it back in. Then he left his shovel there, finally makes it to the big pile, doesn't have a shovel, so he's got to go back. It was almost comical watching this kid. And then eventually he kept going, and then I could see he realized if he only filled it half full, he would get there faster. So he would wander through the weeds like that. And then he figured out if he took the path, he could get there faster. And then he figured out if he took his shovel with him, he wouldn't have to keep walking back. And you could see the light in his face. And he'd be like, oh, wait a minute. And he was smiling by the time he was done. And he was so proud of the job he did. So he went and got his dad and brought his dad to the manure pile to show him what a good job he had done. And he was telling his dad, hey, I had all of these struggles, and he's telling his dad all the spots where he dumped it out and how many times he had to go get a shovel. And he's like, but Dad, I figured it out. And then I thought if I did it this way, it would be better. And then I thought if I did this, it would be even better. And so just that ability to problem solve and that pride that he felt in figuring out how to do this was so beneficial for him. And the dad very lovingly checked out his manure pile. So,
Aw. That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
sorry, were you gonna say something else?
I was going to say the problem solving part is so great for kids.
And I think it's hard because we have such a this is where I had a hard time expressing like the example, but because depends on what the child you're working with, and it's not forever, like what you said, it's in the long run. Like it does make differences, but you do sometimes have to like change your schedule a little bit.
Yes, you do. Yep. And I will sometimes, if I see a kid's really stuck, I will sometimes ask them, would you like some advice on this? And if
Okay.
I accept the answer no, most kids are
Yeah.
like, no, I don't. I'm like, not a problem. If you change your mind, let me know, because I've done similar things like this before. And then when they do eventually come and ask for advice, I help them problem solve through it. So rather than saying, well, if you would follow the path, you'd get there faster, I'll ask questions. So what do you think would happen if you followed this path? What do you think would be a better way to get there? So it is letting them figure it out and take responsibility, but also as healthy brained adults who are helping them out, our job is to get them to that place where they can succeed.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. But yes, in a way that's asking questions, which I think is brilliant. So
yeah.
So how would you express restitution? I mean, I think we hear the word and kind of have an idea, but
yeah. Restitution is giving back when you have taken something from someone. So when our kids have negative behaviors, it's often that they're taking away from their parents' emotional energy, or they're taking away from their parents' time. So kids learn to give back by doing a restitution for that. And it helps to build that back and forth of relationships. Kids with trauma, they just take because they think they have to be in control. Everything is about them. They will take and take and take and take without ever giving back to the other person. So the restitution allows them to build that part of the relationship and to repair those damages. So if they have had a negative behavior that's drained a parent's emotional energy, they do something to give back to that, whether it's something like a back rub or a hand rub, brushing out the parent's hair, painting their nails, or doing chores around the house. And when they do those things, if they do something like chores, it's taking that burden off of someone else. So they can sweep the floor and that parent has time to rest or time to do something else. So it's really based on that back and forth part of relationships and then repairing damages they've made to the relationship. And you get your house cleaned, so that's always a bonus.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I came home from this last camp and oh my goodness, my garden was like a jungle. Like you could not really tell where the flowers were anymore. So I posted a picture of it on our camp chat and someone's like, we will send you respite kids to pull your weeds.
Oh, that's so funny.
Great restitution.
Yes. And then what's the benefit of, and the reason for not warning or threatening? Not that they don't know, I guess, because you have to still like lay out the rules or whatever, right?
Yeah. Any type of threat or warning, generally as healthy brained adults, we think of it as giving them another chance because that's how our brains perceive it. Brains who have experienced trauma, because they're so prone to being in survival mode, they take that as threatening. This person is scary, this person is mean, this person is angry, this is not a safe situation. And so it pushes their brain further into survival mode. So the best way for our kids to learn things and have better behaviors and access logic and reasoning is figuring it out through actions. So a lot of times it's just kind of letting them figure it out rather than saying things like, the next time you do this, this is going to happen. And we think of it like we're giving them another chance, right? They think of it as, you're scary, you're threatening, now I'm not safe. And because they're in survival mode, and they think that is going to be inevitable, they will do it sooner a lot of the time to kind of just get it over with. They will also use it as a push away behavior. So they will push your buttons and you say, don't do this because this is going to happen. They're like, okay, let me see. Are you actually going to stick to what you said? Obviously, this is going to annoy you if I did it, so I'm going to do it.
Yes.
So when we use things like our brain-based interventions, we always have the first time rule. The first time a child does a behavior, we deal with it. And it gives the child that really clear understanding of what's acceptable and what's not. You do this behavior right away, here's your opportunity to find a solution to do it better. And so instead of being in survival mode, they're able to access that logic and reasoning part of the brain.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap it up here. But when I first went to camp, I found myself he wasn't even actually part of the team. He was just part of he owned the campground that like the team was renting.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I met some other people and I texted one of the awesome foster moms that I worked for. And I said, what happens when you have a Baptist, some Mennonites, and a Catholic together? Anyone who knows me knows I have St. Joseph's House of Repose page, very Catholic. And she's like, I don't know what. And I was like, you have a bunch of people who really want to help kids.
Yeah.
And we can all find unity in that program, right? Regardless of our theological differences or way of viewing the world. And we have people with secular backgrounds too, right?
Yep.
And I just found that really beautiful though. Like Christian unity is really important to me,
Mm-hmm.
but also just because people know kind of the general theme of my page and things has to do with our relationship with God.
Yeah.
What do you feel like in your experience of faith journeying through all the things that you've journeyed through and also probably hearing a lot of like I'm sure you hear a lot of stories that kids go through, which is terrible. There's a lot of evil in our world.
Yeah.
But what do you feel that has taught you just about yourself and particularly your relationship with God?
I always have the thought, and we do camps or I work with families who sometimes, like you said, have secular backgrounds. So I've worked with atheist couples who have zero belief in God. And I always wonder how on earth they get through life, because I cannot imagine facing these things that are really, really hard. You're a child who has experienced trauma, the mental health struggles it brings to parents. What do you do if you can't pray about it and trust that someone else is in charge of all of this? So I think over the years, it's really deepened my relationship with God because I see all of these really hard things. And I know for me, the only way I'm going to get through it is by trusting that somebody else is in charge, that somebody else can be in control of what's going on. So we just talked about this at the last camp I was at with one of the other intervention team people. I was like, I just keep praying all day. Like, it's just kind of that constant one train of thought in my brain. And again, I was like, I don't know how people do this without being able to pray. Every time I work with a kid, before I say anything, that prayer is always, what do I say to this child? What is the best thing for this child in this moment? And God always has the answer. It always comes out how it should.
Yes.
Yeah. So prayer is fantastic. And dealing with all of this has definitely deepened my personal relationship with God as well.
Yeah, I learned a lot about myself in attachment and the idea of God, and even just the ideas of like the things that separate us from God and stuff. It was so good.
Mm-hmm.
So if people want to get in contact with you or resources or anything, where would be the best place for them to go?
My website, you can start out there, the RADdishRanch.org. We've got, lots of resources on there. So upcoming courses are listed on there. Our upcoming Camp Attach camps are on there. Then there's a monthly newsletter that's different parenting tips and techniques and information and all of that stuff. Then we have resources on therapeutic parenting, things like playtime and bedtime routines and all of that stuff. So look around on there, see what you can see. And then anyone who wants to contact me personally can email me at info@theradishranch.org. And I'm usually pretty good about answering emails, usually.
Okay.
Unless I'm at a camp and then it's a little chaotic. So
Yes. Which, do you have the dates for camp on the website?
yes, we have one in September. It's, I think, starts the 15th or whatever the Sunday is close to that. And then we have one in Pennsylvania, which goes the end of October into the beginning of November.
Okay.
Which I think that one will be a little cold.
Yes.
And the Florida one is apparently right over hurricane season, so that will be fun.
Then you'll just, I guess you'll just be praying harder. I was wanting to come
Exactly.
to the one in September, but my sister's getting married.
Oh.
So that was like,
Oh yeah. Yeah. My brother's getting married in September, but luckily the week before camp. So I could
good.
fit both in.
That's good.
Yeah.
The other thing is that what other resources would you recommend to people struggling? I don't know if there's like your favorite book or who you think is great.
The two books I recommend the most to parents are Simplicity Parenting by Kim John Payne and The 5 Love Languages. And there's 5 love languages for children, 5 love languages for teens. There's a whole bunch. So but those are kind of the top two that I recommend because they really help parents to understand the need for simplicity in their child's lives to help heal that trauma, and then how to connect on a deeper level with their child by using the love languages. So those are kind of my two go-to books.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's everything. So
All right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate it. And I hope that more people contact you. This is not a very big thing, but it's just some people keep asking and I just don't have the right answers. I still think you have to come and see.
Yeah. It's so hard to explain what therapeutic care is or what camp is. You've got to see it.
Yes. So that's the invitation. Come and see.
Yeah.
Well, talk to Karen. She'll let you know.
Come and experience all the wonderful things.
Yes. Okay. I am just going to figure out how to do this. We're going to stop.